Hello, and welcome to All Our Little Messes, a podcast focused on healing through intentional conversations about parenting, relationships, religion, and more. I am your host, Veronica Winrod, and I'm so happy to have you here, listening in on my thoughts today. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, and welcome back to All Our Little Messes. This is episode number 7, I believe, and today we're going to be talking about the rates of postpartum and clinical depression in women and why they are such a big problem and why the numbers seem to be on the rise. And to kind of help with that discussion today, I have someone who has had personal experience with that and has seen a lot of that kind of thing in the community. Katelyn, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yes, my name is Katelyn. I am a mother to a 6-year-old. I am a parent educator in the community, and my background is in education. I have an associate's in early childhood education, and I have a bachelor's in elementary education. And my job is a parent educator with parents as teachers.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's been a really great ride to educate in a different way than I originally thought for elementary.
Nice.
And so I have a ton of experience with mental health because I've struggled with it, and it's been definitely interesting to see how the other generations have reacted in my family alone to my mental health struggles.
Right.
So, yeah, and I've been through it. Yeah.
And did you have so when you first realized that you were having mental health problems, was this something that was related to birth, like a postpartum thing, or was it just situational, like an environmental thing? Or
I think it's been situational mostly. After having my son, I definitely think I struggled, but I think it wasn't postpartum depression. It was more that I was in such a horrible relationship at the time, in a marriage that I was stuck in, and I found out that I was being cheated on. I think it was probably 6 months into our marriage, and I had a little baby, and so our relationship was fresh, and having a baby was fresh, and I also was 22 years old, and so I was fairly young, and I didn't have support that I think a new mother should have. So yes, it was situational, and it gets better when I'm out of bad situations, but at the same time, it's still like underlying.
Right. Yeah. Did you have a hard time talking to people about it and actually not only allowing yourself to face that you might have depression problems, but was it also something that you had problems with the people around you?
Yeah. So my mom has always been super great for me to talk to because she struggles with depression and anxiety. But when it's come to talking to, say, my grandma about it, that was rough because she's just pull up your bootstraps and do life. And she had 5 kids and she had foster kids.
Oh,
she was doing all of the things. No, I was never depressed. No, I never felt down. No, I always had it.
She was super mom.
She was super mom. Yeah. And I don't think that was true because I know her history and I know what she's gone through. And so that generational gap is
and there. Also the super mom thing to me is, I feel like we could say 90% of the time is a facade. It's a fake it until you make it because you can't let people know that you're failing. And so you have to put on the face and you have to pretend that you have it all together. And that kind of just feeds right back into this whole stigma surrounding postpartum depression and clinical depression in women, and why it's so underreported is because women have to have it all together at all points. Like, we cannot fail. We're not allowed to fail.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've definitely seen that, especially in parents that I work with. They don't have that support. They don't have that person to talk to. And they also think it's normal. Oh, this is just, normal, what I'm going through. And postpartum depression is not normal.
No.
And it shouldn't be just lived with. It should be talked about and discussed with different ways that can help them.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. And I feel like because it's such a huge problem, and the fact that it's not talked about, like, you can definitely see where it was so funny when I was actually researching this, because I became curious one day over how big of a problem depression and postpartum depression has become in women. So I just started researching it and doing, just research on numbers and stuff. And they were astronomical. Like, I was shocked. I had no idea it was this bad, because when people talk about postpartum depression, they talk about it like it's something very, very few women face. But the reality is, so, like, the average number I could find was 1 in 7 women experience postpartum depression after birth. That's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge. And the fact too, and then I also found articles that were saying that over 50% of postpartum depression cases aren't actually even reported. So that there's a very good chance that number is even higher.
Yeah.
We're talking 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 women, possibly. It's insane.
Yeah. And it's not as talked about. We don't know the signs. And I know, I'm not even sure what the treatments are. I mean, obviously you can get depression type medicine, and I'm a firm believer in counseling, but other than that, like, what can you do, especially for those really hard cases of postpartum depression that I've heard about? That's the kind of extreme that I've heard about, is like, they don't want to be with their baby, and the lack of attachment.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and that's definitely the ones, that you hear about make the news, but I don't know, like, just the fact that they've also gone up so quickly just in the past 10 years is also, like, very concerning, I feel like, too. Like, what's causing these numbers to go up so quickly and so high?
Yeah. I mean, what has happened in the last 10 years that is causing this depression, not just in our generation, because generationally, yes, our generation, basically, like, millennials and younger, are more depressed than ever. And we've had fewer wars, I suppose, than the boomers generation.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have the internet now. So that's one thing I can think of.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, internet is,
just
knowledge is power.
The basic thing of, going on Instagram or Facebook and just scrolling, and then you start, like, falling into that pit of comparing yourself to others, and then, like, oh my goodness, why haven't I accomplished this with my life? Why am I not like this person? And then it just, like, it throws you into this. So I definitely agree the internet has not been good in that case.
Yeah. I mean, we have all the knowledge at our fingertips with the internet, and yet what we choose to do, what a lot of people choose to do, is put each other down. And even with mom influencers, right?
Yes.
We have the mom influencers who've got it all together, and they have all of their kids dressed matching. Are they talking about mental health? No,
because they've got it together. They're super mom.
Yeah.
And they're just, like, feeding back into that whole, it's easy, and I've totally got this, and I don't need any help. And but the numbers say something different entirely. They say that 10 to 20% of new mothers will experience some type of depression. And we're not just talking about, hormone like postpartum depression here. We're talking about actual clinical depression. And that's 10 to 20% of new mothers are going to experience some kind of clinical depression during the first 2 years.
Yeah.
And that's insane. And it really does boil down to like the lack of support and the lack of resources that there are for mothers, because like you said earlier, like people don't actually know what the cause is and what the cure is for this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, and there's not enough, I feel like there's not enough resources that are actually looking into this. And so the problem is just compounding and getting worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely is. And, you know, I mean, women are having to work in this economy. You need two incomes just to survive. So that's a huge thing that's been happening is that, you know, everything is so much more expensive. You can't live on just your husband or your partner's income, not to mention single mothers, which I am and I struggle with. And so I know that situation more intimately.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I definitely agree. And it was, so when I was doing the research for this, I came across this report that was released by Blue Cross Blue Shield. And they found a nearly 30% increase in postpartum depression rates in between 2014 and 2018. So it was roughly about 4.5 years. And they did a study across 1.8 million pregnancies. And they found in those 4 years, they found a nearly 30% increase in postpartum depression in just those 4 years versus the previous 4 years. And I don't know what happened in 2014 to 2018, because like when I started thinking about it, I was like, we didn't have anything major beyond like an election. There was nothing.
Right. I mean, definitely when you compare it to like 2020 new moms.
Oh my gosh.
Seriously lacked that support.
Well, actually, like even the depression, the rates in depression, actually, now that you bring that up, the rates in depression during the COVID pandemic in new moms actually went up from previous years. It went up 15 to 40.7% compared to previous years. And that I can understand, because COVID was horrible. I mean, you had to be a mom, you had to be a wife, you had to be an employee, and then they closed down the schools, so you had to be a school teacher. Then you had moms giving birth in very isolated circumstances because nobody was allowed to be in the hospital with them. And then I mean, giving birth in a hospital can sometimes be a very clinical experience already. And then you throw COVID restrictions on top of that, and it's just, it can be turned into a very, very traumatizing birth experience for anyone, which a lot, like often will cycle into postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety because of that. So, but 15 to 40%, like that's insane. That's insane.
Wild. Yeah.
And I mean, the numbers were already up over previous years, and they're increasing. They're increasing as we go on. Like the numbers are not falling.
Yeah. It's an epidemic. I mean, there's something's going on, and we're not looking at it in the right way that we should be. We're not giving support. Like in other countries, I love that they do this. For example, in Korea, I believe it is, North Korea, they do a postpartum.
North Korea or South Korea?
Oh, I don't know. I'll have to look it up.
I don't think North Korea is very nice.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay, Kim Jong-un.
Yeah. South Korea, maybe. But
they have it's got to be South Korea. They have a postpartum doula, I think. It's a Korean postpartum care. Korea has more than 400 postpartum centers around the country where moms and babies go for 1 to 2 weeks after their hospital stay to receive additional care and help. And usually this is a government program.
Right.
I mean, why isn't America doing this?
Why isn't society, culture, why aren't people doing this? See, and that's my thing is like, everybody talks about, why isn't the government doing this? I'm like, we shouldn't get to a point where the government is forcing the issue because the issue has gotten so bad. Like, we shouldn't get to that point. Like, society needs to be structured around motherhood and the family. And because if we aren't, then we're going to have situations like this.
Yeah.
Like, they need to value motherhood and like the work and the sacrifice that we put in, and they don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like, if the government has to step in, that's a problem. That's a big problem because they shouldn't have to. But yeah, I don't. That's very interesting. And then, it's Korea is not the only country that has stuff like that either.
Yeah, I'm sure there's other countries. I just happen to see a lot of TikToks lately about this postpartum culture that they have. And I think it's super awesome. And I know here in America, we have postpartum doulas that do that. It's just not a government program, and it's not talked about the same kind of way like Korea does.
Well, and then like the attitude around just having a doula period is kind of hippie-ish almost. Like, if you have a doula, you're kind of considered one of those weird hippies, which is really unfortunate, because if people really understood what a doula was, they would want every mother to have one at their birth, because they're amazing. Yeah.
They're amazing. My mother was a doula, and so she helped me through my birth.
That's
and
awesome.
It was incredible. It was. She was so great. And you can even have doulas for grief and loss.
Yeah.
When you lose your baby, they'll help you hold the baby and take pictures. Doulas are incredible in all forms. And it's not just for natural births.
No.
She helped me through my epidural, which I didn't want, but I ended up having to get, because that's what happens when you're in labor for 52 hours. You're exhausted.
Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I cringe when I think about my 8.5 hours, 52 hours. Oh my gosh.
A lot of it wasn't active labor, but regardless, I was like in pain. My water had broken, so my water continued to break, slowly through those hours. And she was like, you know what? Your uterus is tired. You are exhausted. You cannot push out this baby on your own. You can't have it in the water like you wanted. And she supported me through that through that transition, because it was very hard for me. I wanted to stick to my birth plan. So I always recommend doulas for everybody.
Yeah, do it. Do it. Like, I feel like if everybody got a doula, or at least had someone who was even just taking a birthing class, like if your partner takes a birthing class so that they go into that hospital room or they go into that birth center knowing what to expect and knowing what kind of support they're going to be expected to provide, like that would be huge.
Yeah, I mean, it shows a lower C-section rate, less anxiety, decreased vacuum-assisted deliveries, and possibly lower induction rates. I mean, that's what even birthing class outcomes show. So that's incredible. I mean, that alone is, like I said, knowledge is power.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to be your own advocate, and to have maybe your partner or your doula help you have an advocate, because sometimes when you're in pain, you can't talk.
Actually, that was my experience with my first. Was I went into this with this glorified idea of how I was going to give birth, and everything was going to 100% go according to plan. Nothing was going to go off track. I was just going to go in there. So first thing that happened was his head kind of shifted right onto my sciatica, and I couldn't walk for 2 days. So I was just like, okay, you're getting evicted. So I was induced, and that was like my first step off of my plan. But I was like, that's okay. We can get induced. I can still do this naturally. They broke my water, and it was 45 minutes after that, after I started cussing out the nurses, that my husband was just like, okay, honey, honey. So, he was like trying to like help me breathe through them, but like the Pitocin and the breaking the water and everything was just like very intense and coming on very fast. And he was actually the one who's like, okay, babe, I know this is not what you wanted, but seriously, you can't keep doing this. Like I had like 15-second breaks between contractions. It was horrible. He's like, you need to get an epidural. And I kept saying, no, I don't want one. And he kind of like put his foot down in a way, which I am eternally grateful for, by the way. I just want to put that out there. Just very grateful that he was just like, babe, no.
Yeah. Well, he probably knew you more than you could know yourself in that moment.
I was like in this haze. I couldn't even think. Like when you're in that zone of trying to just make it through the contraction and trying to breathe through it, like you can't, it's hard to think straight. So yeah, I ended up getting the epidural, and yeah, like my entire body relaxed. I was actually able to, I could still feel the contractions because they gave me what was called a walking epidural.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I was able to like still feel them so that when it was it was time to push, I could still feel when it was time to push. So it kind of just took the edge off, but it was enough to where like my body relaxed and like labor actually progressed, and I wasn't cussing out the nurses anymore. So, that's always the plus.
Yeah.
But no, and like I had experience with birth before then. So I knew what to expect ish. You can never really know 100% what to expect without having done it yourself. But like looking back, like I definitely, the fact that I isolated myself so much and just experienced so much anxiety surrounding the baby and his growth, and was he eating enough? Was he pooping enough? Was he peeing enough? Is my supply enough? Is there, and like it was down to, I wonder what the fat percentage is in my breast milk kind of thing. I was obsessing.
Wow.
I was obsessing about everything. And so looking back, and I'm like, I was definitely experiencing some like anxiety, depression stuff. There was something going on there. That was not a normal reaction to birth.
Yeah, definitely. But I remember that same thing. I would wake up, it felt like every 5 minutes to check his breathing because I was so scared of him stopping breathing for some reason, even though we practiced safe sleep for the most part.
Well, and I think a big part of that too was when I was in the hospital, the nurses were just on me all the time for having him in the bed all the time. And so like I was constantly terrified of falling asleep with him after that, because I was worried that, something might happen. And so, yeah, I was always waking up, checking to see if he was still breathing.
Yeah.
And it got better after about 6-7 months is when like stuff started to finally die down, but I wasn't like 100% until about a year old. He started, he was more independent. He started weaning himself off, and like I went back to work and got to taste the outside world again.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I was isolated because of the bad relationship I was in. He isolated me. So I just had, him who wasn't really there.
Right.
And I had my limited knowledge. I had, and I think about, I wish that I had a parent educator.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's the other program that's also nationwide called Nurse Family Partnership. They work with first-time moms, low-income first-time moms.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I had one of those resources, because then I would have had somebody outside telling me how things are going to look, and they weigh the baby and they tell you if you're doing things right. But yeah, I had, and then the other piece was I had his grandma kind of telling me, oh, you should put rice cereal in his bottle. I know. And that's been very controversial. And in my work now with families, they'll say, yeah, we've been adding rice cereal to the bottle. And I was like, wait, what does your doctor say about that? Yeah, the doctor says to do it.
Oh,
so
dear.
In some cases, right, they're saying to do it. So specifically with acid reflux, I think is
Okay.
more where they're saying to do it. But
Well, maybe I should start eating rice cereal. I've had really horrible acid reflux over the past week.
yeah. But, so I was getting a lack of sleep.
Uh-huh.
I was isolated because of the situation I was in. I had new baby. I had already had existing depression on top of that,
Right.
and had been, during pregnancy, was on the highest dose of Zoloft possible during pregnancy.
Oh my goodness.
And so, hormones crashing and having this kind of outside influence of his grandma and her generational ties to it. I mean, my mental health suffered. And then on top of that, where I was living was very snowy, not as much, sun. And so I was lacking that vitamin D. And it was a rough time. And I look back and I wish I could have just given myself a hug back then and just said, it's okay, you're going to make it through this. Because for a while, I didn't think I was going to. And, thankfully I had somebody there, a very close friend who reached out to me and checked on my mental health. But it was really only her who was able to do that with me.
Yeah. Well, and that's also really important. It's like actually, having people around that know you well enough to understand that something's going on, something's wrong, and checking on you, and not being those people who are just like, oh, you just need to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and you'll get through this. It'll be okay. Just fake it till you make it, which doesn't work. It doesn't make the problem go away. It's like using alcohol or any other kind of drug. It doesn't make the problem go away. It's still there.
Yeah.
It's still there.
And I once heard a really beautiful quote that said, trauma is what happens when we don't have a validating witness. Thankfully, I had a validating witness in that, my close friend was able to say, I see you're going through something, you're struggling, you are not having a good time. And therefore, it didn't turn into a trauma. But in other cases where this is happening, where women are really struggling with postpartum depression, worse than I had experienced situationally, it's a trauma. You can have birth trauma, and you can certainly have this sort of postpartum depression trauma that happens when there's not a validating witness.
Yeah. And, and that's something I think that people need to focus on too, is like understanding and acknowledging why a woman may be experiencing that. And so that's like, you were very lucky there because you had that person who was there in your life to acknowledge the reason why you were experiencing mental health problems. And that's not something that a lot of women have the luxury of, I think, because I mean, just scrolling through like TikTok or Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, whatever, there's been this huge increase of influencers I've noticed lately, especially since COVID, talking about the mental load of motherhood and like how isolated they feel and like how full of anxiety and depression they are over carrying the mental load of motherhood, because everything was, they're expected to carry everything and deal with everything. And on top of that, you have, and I this part is like really, really hard, but like the lack of actual focused healthcare for women, even down to things like our reproductive health or, our mental health, especially, everything is just treated with a Band-Aid. And they don't have, even in their healthcare providers, they don't have somebody there in their life who's actually willing to get down to the root of the problem and figure out why this is happening. They don't have that. They're just so, Band-Aid is just thrown on top of it. And like,
and I think all of Western medicine really, it is more of a symptomatic cure. And I'm a firm believer in like our mental health needs to be talked about more, and not just, here's a depression med, try this, see if it works, see if it helps. I'm a huge advocate for counseling and therapy, and even my son is in therapy, and he has anxiety, which, I feel a little bit bad about, because I have anxiety, and did I give that to him? And that's part of it, but I had another point to it and it's lost.
Oh, that happens.
It does. The train is gone.
Once you get pregnant, your brain just kind of just leaves with the baby. It's just gone.
It's
no,
muddled.
it's No, and I mean, like, even when it comes to, our healthcare system, Western medicine, and how they treat everything symptomatically. I had a friend of mine who had major health problems with her reproductive health, and every solution to that problem was a Band-Aid. And it was basically a wait until she has to go back into surgery to have it fixed, because they didn't know what caused it, and they weren't even bothering to look into what was causing it. They weren't willing to do any labs. They weren't willing to do any kind of testing. It was just like, oh, you have this problem. Let's put you under for 3 or 4 hours. We'll do the surgery. We'll get all that shaved out and send you home. Here's some pain meds. We'll see you in 6 months.
Yeah.
And because of that, like, her mental health struggled. Like, it suffered so much because of that. Like, she just went into this cycle of, like, I guess this is where I'm at now, and I'm never going to be able to have kids. I'm never going to have, a normal cycle. I'm never going to be able to actually have a normal relationship with my body. Like, her thing was, my body and my mind hate me.
Oh.
And it's so sad, because I hear that a lot. I actually hear that a lot. My body and my mind hate me. And, like, I've had several friends who have had, different mental health and, physical problems with, like, reproductive health or whatever. And it's always this attitude of, like, my body hates me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's an awful place to be, I think, to experience, like, this kind of, that missing link of, this is supposed to be the skin I'm in. I'm supposed to feel great, and I just don't. Like, there's that disconnect with that. But yeah, all of Western medicine, I think, does that symptomatically. And I've been to a naturopath doctor, which, of course, like, our state Medicaid doesn't pay for. You have to pay out of pocket for.
Oh my.
So this is a very sort of exclusive experience that if you're able to pay for it, you can. So I went one time to a naturopath doctor to kind of figure out reproductive issues, what was going on, also weight issues. And he was like, so tell me what's going on in the home. Tell me about your mental health. I mean, it was wild. Goodness. He was like, well, what are you eating? How many vegetables per day? Why doesn't every doctor do that?
No, they just automatically prescribe something.
Yeah. Instead of Zoloft, he was like, hey, I want you to really focus on your, vegetable intake, your fruit intake, and then making sure you're getting vitamin D. Like, vitamin D was never a thing I realized that I was so deficient in. And then he did my labs and realized, like, I'm way under my vitamin D level that I should be having. And hey, maybe life is really great, actually, once I started getting the proper vitamin D. Like, maybe love is real.
No, actually, it's funny to bring that up, because, like, I've always had iron problems, and every time I go into a doctor, they would want to do infusions.
Yeah.
Not try to figure out why I am so anemic, but just put me on an iron pill, and they wanted to do infusions, and that was it. Or I had experienced really, really terrible migraines with this pregnancy, and instead of trying to figure out why I have terrible migraines, they just, prescribed me this pill, which I found out later was an extremely addictive medication.
Oh my gosh.
I know. And so they prescribed me this pill. I was supposed to take it only, it's like once every 4 hours or something like that. And so I only had to take like one a day. And I had a friend over and she saw the bottle on the counter and she read the label. And she's like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe they prescribed this to you. And I'm like, what? Why? And she's like, well, it's very addicting. Like, why are they prescribing this to pregnant women? And I was just like, so I brought it up to my midwife and she was like, oh, it's really not that bad. And, it's just they overblew it just to make people scared of it, but you're fine. And when I actually started doing research on it, like a couple medical journals and stuff online, it's a very addictive substance. And I was very shocked. So instead of trying to figure out why I was having, migraines, they just, prescribed this very addictive pain medication and sent me home.
Wow. May I ask what medication was it?
Oh, I don't even remember. It's been so long since I took it. It was a combination of acetaminophen, caffeine, and something starts with a B, maybe.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of it, but I was just kind of, when she told me that, oh, it's not that bad, and then I did the research, I was like, oh my goodness, it is that bad, and it kind of put the whole, they'll just throw a Band-Aid on it, on everything.
And they prescribed it to you while you were pregnant?
While I was pregnant.
That's wild.
I know. And that's like, that's the thing is like, so I've started researching everything that they've been telling me to take. But it was such a contrast too, because they've also told me to up my magnesium intake.
Yeah.
Instead of putting me on a laxative, because a side effect of all of these meds that they're having me take because of complications during my pregnancy, I have a bunch of complications. And so one of the things that I thought they were going to definitely prescribe was a laxative. And instead they told me up my magnesium intake. And I was just like, oh, well, that's new.
Yeah.
Instead of giving me another pharmaceutical, you're telling me to, here, increase your vitamins and minerals.
And that's incredible. Like, we are all deficient in magnesium. I love magnesium.
And I've sometimes wondered if, like, the mental health problems in the U.S., especially among women, is because of how much our diet has changed in the past couple decades.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, our food is at least it used to be so nutrient dense. And now when people actually go and test it, I forgot what the percentage was. I'd have to look it up, but it's very low, which is why they sell all of these supplements and you have to take all of these, vitamins on top of the food you're already eating.
Yeah.
And, all the additives and preservatives and everything is also going to affect, the equilibrium in our bodies as well. And so that's going to affect, our brains and our mental health and our physical health and everything, because there's definitely a very fine, delicate balance in our bodies. And if we start messing with that, with what we put into it, then
yeah, everything is so processed, so full of salt and sugar. And I think too, when they advertise things, they're not being truthful.
No.
So yeah, definitely our food has changed and we are less self-sustainable and more relying on, the quality of Walmart. And if you're making enough money, sure, you can shop at your local farmer's market.
Yeah.
But we haven't even really gotten into the disparity of different races, different socioeconomic status. I mean, that alone, if you want to look at statistics for postpartum depression for women of color, I mean, it's higher. I had seen in an article on Medical News Today that postpartum depression, as you had said, affects like 1 in, I think it was 6 women.
Oh, wow.
But for women of color, it was even more. And they can't even really tell you how much more because there's such a stigma around women of color and talking about mental health because of the different cultures and the different races. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, and me being, partially a woman of color, I'm some Hispanic, and some Jewish, and so there's kind of a mix. But beyond that, I mean, for Black women, Indian, Native American, even the tribal groups, they're not talking about
Right.
mental health, and they're not able to access the same support that even we do. So that's pretty wild too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and then like it goes beyond that too, because like a lot of these social like ethnic groups, they don't have the kind of financial resources that we do, and so they're not able to access, healthcare, even if they wanted to. Like even if that stigma didn't exist, like it would be very difficult because statistically these people are they have lower income. That's just kind of a thing that happens for some reason. But yeah, they don't have access to actual legitimate healthcare. They don't have access to good food. Like you said, our options are Walmart, and, if we're lucky, we can make it to like a Costco or something. But that's kind of our options. And Walmart hasn't historically always had the best nutritionally balanced food.
Yeah, their quality, you can actually see it. I saw a picture the other day of two different beefs. The color from the Walmart beef was like this weird shade of pink that we've all
Oh, I
seen.
saw that.
Yeah, and the color from the like farm raised beef,
Yeah.
that I don't think it was bought from a store. I think they had like bought this from a butcher. The color was so rich and the texture was so different. Oh my goodness. That is the quality that we don't even know.
And it's more than that too, because I was looking at the picture and it was the fat ratios.
Yes.
I was looking at the fat ratios and I was like, oh my goodness, what are they feeding these cows?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole different topic. I used to be obsessed with the whole food industry.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I could talk about it for days too. I mean, I'm
my husband,
crunchy, so
yeah, I call myself scrunchy. See, I
okay, yeah.
am crunchy. I try to be as organic as possible, but I am definitely not above going to Mickey D's.
Yeah, and see, we call it cancer food, and we don't go, but
I enjoy my
do other
cancer food,
places.
Caitlin.
I know. I have my other stuff. Like my guilty pleasure is Bath and Body Works scent, but I know that the soy disrupts my hormones, and so I will put it in for like a little bit when a guest is coming over, and then I'll pull it right back out. But that is my guilty pleasure. So I'm like semi crunchy, I guess you could say.
Yeah. I'm semi, because we do mostly game meat, but then I buy our chickens from Costco, and I'm pretty sure Costco gets their chicken from Tyson. So
yeah, definitely.
There you go. So I've offset my good game meat with my good hormone infused chicken breast.
Sure. Yep. Pumped full of whatever they pump them full of, and they're nice and fat.
Yeah. I had to start buying the chicken breast tenderloins because the regular chicken breast was so covered in like this, like when I defrost it was covered in like this slime and this yellow fat and like chunks of like cartilage, and it was just, it was so nasty. And I was just like, what have they done? What have they done to our food? What have they done to our food? And like, what is it doing to my body?
Yeah.
And to my brain?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. No, and that's that, if our food changed, if people started, and I feel like they actually are starting to do that. They are starting to take a stand, so to speak. If people started actually paying attention to what they were putting into their bodies, I feel like the mental health crisis would at least slow down a little bit.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I don't think we can 100% heal what we've done to our bodies, because it's, and like what we've done to our minds, like it's on a cellular level at this point, like it's affecting everything. But
definitely. Yeah. And you want to talk about mental health, and so it's interesting. Yeah, he just came to visit.
Yeah, I always tell people, like, halfway through episodes, sometimes I'll have my toddler come out and say hi, and I'm just like, you know what? I'm not going to even bother editing this out. This is a family podcast. Like, you know, if you have a problem hearing my toddler ask for a hug or the dog panting, I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is what you're getting.
Yes.
Yeah, so when a pregnant mom, and I think this is what happened to me, I experienced so much depression and anxiety during pregnancy, it actually changes on a cellular level that child's brain. And so how I've seen it play into action for my son is he now has anxiety as a 6-year-old. He was a crier. And I think when you study the cortisol levels of a child who had a mother who had a lot of anxiety versus a child who had a mother who did not have anxiety, their baseline cortisol levels were heightened than the child who did not have that.
Oh, wow.
So they're going into the world with higher cortisol levels. So this is a generational thing. More mothers who are more anxious and more depressed leads into more children who are more anxious and more depressed, and on that goes.
Wow.
So yeah, it's scary to think about how much our bodies in pregnancy affect our babies, but it really does. And that's why they say when you're pregnant, I mean, try to be as stress-free as possible, as well as taking your prenatals and all of that healthy, nutritious eating. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, I did not know that. I hadn't even really thought about that, actually, like how it could do that. But that actually does make sense, because there's like so much that passes between the mother and the baby in utero.
Yeah. And so because I had heightened cortisol levels through most of my pregnancy, I was constantly crying. I was constantly worried. I was constantly being berated and belittled.
Right.
From the person who was supposed to be loving me and supporting me. And also we moved a ton. So moving is a big stressor also.
Right.
He came out as a crier, and I struggled with breastfeeding, and the crying in turn like flipped my anxiety on. And so I had to wear like earplugs just to deal with him. And yeah, he just kind of got triggered a little bit easier than another kid who doesn't. Yeah, than most kids. Yeah, that cortisol piece is huge.
Wow. See, that just kind of goes to show, though, that like if we had better support for moms, and like if there wasn't such a stigma surrounding mental health, especially in women, this wouldn't be such a big problem.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, we need more support.
Yeah, we definitely do. So what would you suggest to people that are like, you know, looking to increase the support in their lives and looking to, you know, maybe help fix current mental health problems that they might have right now?
Definitely. So I would say if you're a mother to children 0 to 5, look up Parents as Teachers. It's a nationwide program, a home visiting program. That's just a little plug. I fully believe in the outcomes of home visiting. So look up if it's in your area. That's number one. Support is a huge thing. So find somebody that you trust to talk to, whether that's a friend, a therapist, a family member. You need to start identifying who you can talk to, and you need to have that trust built.
Right.
And I would also say getting sleep is super important. Oh my goodness. Enough sleep. Definitely for yourself, for your children, take some magnesium, let it slowly drift you to sleep and go to bed. I mean, but don't sleep too much if you're depressed. That can happen. So get up on time, have a good sleep schedule.
Right.
And then, like we said, that nutrition piece is huge. So eating healthy foods will, fuel you with that nutritious piece. Are you getting enough protein? Are you snacking on like empty foods? And then, get out and walk and enjoy nature. Don't push yourself to do anything crazy like exercise, but just a gentle walk.
Crazy like exercise. Don't ever do anything crazy like exercise. Yeah, I always tell people that if you see me running, you should be running too.
Be worried.
Be worried. Be scared, people.
Yeah. But just even a gentle little exercise. And just, I would also say to anybody out there, you are not alone, even though it feels like it. And you be gentle with yourself and take time for yourself. Yeah. And
counseling. I would also want to add counseling. Like I struggled a couple years ago. I was really struggling with just, it all kind of just fell all at once on top of me during, it was actually during COVID, coincidentally. So it was during COVID. I was working. My husband was gone working. I had a almost 2-year-old. I had just had a miscarriage. There was like all of these things that just like fell on top of me. And I had a lot of trauma from a couple years ago that I had gone through that I had actually never really gone to counseling for. Like I'd started a couple appointments and the guy turned out to be crazy, a quack. So I quit and I was just like, therapy is stupid. I just need to get over myself and move on. Well, getting over myself and moving on ended in a panic attack underneath my work desk. And so my husband was just like, babe, you need help. Like you need to talk to someone. You need to figure out what's going on. You need to work through this. So I started going to therapy, and it was telehealth. It was all over the phone because, during the middle of COVID, so there was no in-person appointments or anything like that. But oh my gosh, like it helped so much. And it could have just been the therapist, but I was only in therapy for 7 months, I think. And it was an absolute night and day difference. And like just how I approached life and how I looked at life. And I mean, I was so negative before and just, waiting for the other shoe to drop constantly. And just, like I said, negative. And like, she was so helpful when it came to just giving me tools just to start my day on a positive note. Just little things like, what am I thankful for today? Waking up with that just positive note was just huge. So yeah, therapy is huge when it comes to mental health because, and like a lot of people, like we mentioned earlier in this podcast, like older generations see therapy as a joke.
Yeah.
And I've experienced that in my own family. Like when I would mention going to therapy, it was always like, oh, it's, no, you don't want to go to therapy because, talking about it is just going to keep it at the forefront of your mind at all times. And you just need to bury it and get over it. It's like, but it's still there. Your problem is still there and you haven't faced it and you haven't fixed it.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
Definitely. I would recommend going to therapy. So
yeah. And finding somebody that you trust, like you experienced that with one therapist, it just wasn't doing it. And you have to have a good relationship with your therapist and like what they're doing, but like what they're bringing to the table for you.
Yeah. And it's not always going to feel good too. Like therapy is not going to be easy. It's not easy. It's definitely hard to like face those parts of yourself, but it's so worth it. Even during the brief time, I need to go back, but during the brief time I was in. Like, it is so worth it. So yeah, I would recommend that. So
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on, Katelyn. This has been an amazing conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I hope to have you on again. This was actually really fun.
Yeah.
I enjoyed this. Yes.
I was glad to talk more about mental health, and I hope your viewers can glean something from it.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of All Our Little Messes. Please let us know how much you enjoyed it below and add any questions you have about this episode. Also, don't forget to follow us on Patreon for amazing exclusive perks, including early access to podcast episodes and bonus episodes every month. We've also recently added a support group for all of our paid patrons. You can check us out on Facebook and Instagram for daily updates and insights that mirror podcast topics. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.